Hi, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate demo for the piece I call Zobo the Zombie. Well, it's October, so what better time to start getting into some of these horror pieces? So I did two zombie pieces last year that I never really did as a video here on the channel, so I thought I would jump into the two of them this month. So here right now we've got Zobo. You can see it begins with me exploring shapes. I don't really kind of know what I'm doing here other than a zombie, and I'm just kind of trying some things out. You'll see that the way that I initially construct things is just with some rough lines, just kind of trying to figure out where am I even going with this. I can get kind of some directionality off of the zombie based on the way that I've got that cheekbone placed and where I've got the teeth in the front, and that allows me to start laying down these like stakes in the ground that I can then start basing everything around. I'm drawing this using my fat pencil, which is linked in my brush set down below. You'll see later too that I use a ink brush that is also in that set. When I'm doing something like this, the main things that I'm hunting for is anything that might be somewhat unique. I'm also chasing down aesthetics, like shapes that I think work really, really well. Even when doing something that's horrific or monstrous or whatever, I'm trying to see if I can get still very pleasing shapes, which is why I usually go to things like big round circles for eyes, or these kind of like these marks I'm doing at the top there. They even within themselves have a certain aesthetic that feels pretty good. And the way that like the drop coming off of his tongue looks. So that's kind of what I'm always chasing when I'm like futzing around here. Now I'll treat these elements differently depending on the overall style of a piece, but for this one it's pretty cartoonish and just fun, and all the shapes are kind of circular driven aside from some of the pointiness on other things, but like his head shape and the drops and his eyes and his ears and like all that, even the hair on him has this rounded vibe to it. So I'm just sort of taking that and making sure that I'm keeping it in the back of my mind. When you're doing realistic art, you're basing things off of what you already know exists. You're basing it off of photo reference. Maybe you're filling in some gaps here or there, but at least you have some rules to that. When you're doing stylized things, you're sort of creating the rules on the fly. If you're working on a bigger project where a lot of people have to work on the same thing, you certainly start establishing these rules, calling them out, describing them, trying to set like rules around the whole thing. But when you're doing something like what I'm doing here, where I'm just having fun with it, the big thing that you have to keep in mind is consistency of how you're treating certain things. If you make the hair on his head really spiky and then make the hair on his beard really soft, is that something you're doing deliberately, or did you just kind of forget the shapes that you're going for? This is something that I see in artists that are still trying to find their style, or try even to find a style within a piece. It's something that I see them struggle with, which is that something that is the exact same object or material as something else in the piece is treated differently than the other, and what ends up creating there is an inconsistency, which makes the whole thing feel like it's not cohesive, and it can even communicate to the viewer not even just on stylistic merits, but you're communicating sometimes things like materials, and people are trying to understand what these different materials are. And the more and more that you homogenize materials because you're stylizing, you might have to find other ways to bring that consistency back and make it really clear to people that like this is grass, or these are leaves, or this is water, or whatever. So it's really just about, once you start making a few calls, if that's something that you like, you need to try and make sure that you're always remembering when you come back to it, hey, I need to make sure that I hit that in the exact same way again. So in this piece, you see that manifest in the hair on him. Even some of the shapes of like the teeth, they all have kind of like a fuller, more rounder vibe. Even that one that's long, that's kind of like his front buck tooth, has a roundness to it, even though it's long. The sort of tuft of padding that's coming out of his shoulder has a roundness to it. So trying to keep that in mind the entire time. That doesn't mean that it's perfect, and sometimes you even want to subvert that. So as I was just describing all these consistencies, one thing that you'll notice here too, though, is his really thin, pointy nose. If you go all the way back to where I was doing the rough sketch, you'll see that that kind of comes out fairly early, and that was actually what I wanted to anchor around for the whole piece, is that he's got this almost like egghead shape, he's got these thin body parts, but then he's got this really thin, pointy nose. And then the like big fat gross tongue and all that kind of stuff. So that's something where it's a deliberate decision. I'm not necessarily subverting the expectations of material. I'm subverting, though, the patterns of the shapes that are across the entire character. By the way, I haven't referenced it yet, but for a bit now, as you'll see, the ink brush that I was referring to earlier is what I'm using to ink all of this stuff. It behaves differently than the fat pencil in that I have to be more deliberate about the direction in which I hit my lines. I either drag it from like thin to thick this way, or I start it, well, it always starts thin and then goes thick, but I might actually put my pencil down and kind of start the line but go really slow so that I can achieve the fatness faster and then go in with the fatness. So it's just something where laying down that line is a little bit more deliberate. You can see this is a black and white piece too. How I usually do black and white, which you're seeing in real time here, is I lay down a couple of grays that I just think kind of work, and then everything else is usually black and white with just the opacity of that layer adjusted. You can see here even on the beard, that's just laid in jet black, and then I lower the opacity on it, and the color that's underneath, which in this case is more of a mid-tone gray, ends up mixing with that black a bit, and you just get like a darker gray. Sometimes after I do this and I spend that time balancing all of my values, which is some of that tweaking that you just saw there, I will maybe replace it with a chosen color, not just black on a gray with an adjusted opacity, and other times I won't. It just kind of depends. But I always find it really easier to sort out the values by laying in blacks and whites and then adjusting those opacities. With the shadow here, you can see that that is a, actually I don't know if it's a multiply or a lowered opacity layer. However, if you've watched my videos before, or you just know how like multiply works, if you're using the color black, it actually doesn't matter if you use multiply or if you have it set to a normal layer and then just lower the opacity. Effectively, it's the exact same thing, because of the way multiply works, which I've explained a lot on this channel, and I won't bore the people who've heard it a million times before. But if you don't know how multiply works, you can definitely Google that. It's readily available, or just watch every single one of my videos, and you'll eventually find one where I talk about it. Here's me going in and adding in more of the detailing on the shadows, so you get more of that shadow underneath these little like folds in the sleeve. I also throw in this really heavy rim light because I'm going for that really dramatically lit vibe that you get in like a retro movie. You get it in modern movies too, but I just really wanted to like push that here. And then at the end, I'm throwing in some chromatic aberration. I know everybody loves throwing in chromatic aberration, but something that it really gets you on these black and white pieces is actually brings a little bit of color interest back into the piece, even if you're not wanting it to be a colorful piece. So it sort of adds this like human brain. It's like how human brains react to water. Human brains also react to like gradients and subtle color and like rainbows and shit like that, and so it really helps out to add just a little bit more interest there. You can see here then I just threw in that shadow off of that branch. I decided to add that in at the last second, putting some vignetting on it too, which is just, you know, filling it black and then erasing out of the middle. I'm using a few textures here that are just from my texture library that I have, so, you know, build your own and just throw them in. I think it's set to multiply with the opacity adjusted, and then probably I suck some of the color out of it just to keep everything really black and white. And what you see here, the kind of noodling that I'm doing, this is after I've probably thought the piece was finished. And as I've said before on this channel, I always save out my pieces when I think they're finished and just let them sit like on my phone for a bit so that I can look back at them and see if there's anything that I noticed with like a day or two removed. And then I go back in later if I notice those things and I start readjusting all of those values. So what you're seeing a lot here with all this like flipping on and off of stuff is me saying, oh, is the tongue reading, is the shadow too strong? Should I put the whole thing in shadow? Let's turn that bounce light on. Do I need that bounce light? Yes, I do. Like all of that. So what we got here then is we have a light coming from behind him. We've got a hard rim light to the left, and then we've got this subtle bounce coming up from the bottom just to like build out his definition a little bit more. And this piece is now wrapping up. I didn't go through every detail on this because it's kind of a simple, quick one, but there is the final version right there. This was a little bit of a quick one, not only in creating it, but in doing this video. I just kind of wanted to talk through it really quickly so we could get to it. There's another zombie one that's going to be coming up not too long, so I hope you enjoy that one, and I hope you enjoyed this one. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. And if you have any questions about the process, feel free to leave them down below in the comments. I'll see you on the next one.